All right, welcome to class 5 already. I can't believe it, of painting dynamic sky that glows. And we are going to be doing 2 acrylic demos. I'm going to be starting them off in black and white, and I'm going to be using the same reference. I just flipped it, and I'm going to be showing how I would do one in sunset and one in sunrise, depending on our time frame. It may be that I just get the designs in, and next week go back in either with acrylics or oils and glaze in more colors. But really excited for this. But let's start with just explaining what I have learned from my early years of experimenting with acrylics, where I would just put it on like a plate and just put my acrylics out. And of course, they were drying so quickly, and they were drying so quickly on my painting that I found them annoying. And when I did, started using oils, it was that just made so much more sense to me. But now with acrylics, in the last maybe year and a half, I've been studying them, playing with them, trying different techniques. So the first thing I want to talk about that made a really big difference was the Stay Wet palette. And it does have a red lid that I have a bunch of stuff covered over it already, that makes this like a giant Tupperware. So I can seal it up, and it keeps the paints literally for a week or 2 weeks. It's kind of amazing. So what it is, and you guys already probably know this stuff, but is a giant sponge underneath, and then a piece of paper on top of that. To set it up, I will fill my tub with hot water. I just use my tea kettle downstairs. Fill this up with hot water, let it sit for about 10-15 minutes so the paper really gets saturated. Then, by then it's cooled down. I just go and pour out, and you can just use as hot as you can get out of the tap. You don't have to use a tea kettle. And then I just kind of set it in the sink like this, and the water just drains out. And I just let it drain until it's just a slow drip. You can see it's still dripping a little bit. And I want that. I want some water in there. And so I just put them in. When I'm doing it, like, my favorite way to do it is actually to put the paper on the bottom and the sponge on top. And then I flip it after I've soaked it. But that doesn't seem to matter very much. And that part can be tricky because the paper gets wrinkly and it's hard to get it back into place. So yeah, it's amazing what having a wet surface does. When I go ahead and squeeze out my acrylics, it just keeps it going.
Like, what kind of paper? Is that a palette paper?
It is palette paper that they sell. It's literally the same company.
So it's
And
got
so, yeah,
it.
they just send out packs of, I don't know how many, 20 of them or
And
something.
what's the company again where you got the palette?
Stay Wet palette. I think it's called Masterson.
Yeah, it's Masterson. I have one of those.
Yeah. Okay. So I have 3 of them now. So this is an unused palette right now. You can see here's an old sponge that I've dried out. And so I just put it back in there.
Great.
So I don't know if you can see the word Masterson here, but it's Masterson Stay Wet palette. Yeah, you don't have to get this. You can, definitely make your own, and, a piece of tissue or of like a cloth wet underneath with a piece of wax paper on top. You can do it that way as well. There's a whole bunch of different alternatives, but they're not expensive, and it's amazing how much.
I just got one for $23 at Flicks yesterday.
Right. Yeah, they're really, you'll save the amount of paint you save will pay for itself in, 2 or 3 uses. And yeah, so I also use the same thing for my oil paints. I don't use the sponge and I don't use the paper, but when I first bought one, I didn't like acrylics, so I just turned it into my oil painting, where my oil paints. And the fact that it is airtight and And what I do for my oils, quick diversion here, is I take a any kind of fabric will do, but this is some of my wife's premium cotton rounds, I guess they're called. And I just drop that in the corner, take a little bit of clove oil. Again, this is for my oils, not for the acrylics. Jumping around a little bit here. But I'll just take my clove oil, put a couple drops there, put the lid back on, and it is amazing how that clove oil and an airtight container really keeps your oil paints good for a long time. So with acrylics, I'll squeeze them out, put their piles on. And the nice thing is this paper being wet, I can really move the paint and clean my working area really well. I'll use a palette knife to kind of scrape the colors back towards themselves. And then I will use a paper towel and just wipe that area. And all of a sudden I've got a fairly clean working area again. One of the questions was, you know, it does get musty smelling, just like keeping a sponge for a little while. It just gets kind of stinky. And what I found is a little bit of hydrogen peroxide, just like a tablespoonful in, you know, I don't want it on top. I'll just lift it, take my hydrogen peroxide, put a couple drops on there. It'll soak up through the sponge. And that seems to kill a lot of the mold.
Wow.
Also, when I'm done and throwing away the paper, I will take my sponge and I can either put a little bit of vinegar and water to clean it. I can use dish soap to clean it. And then I just let it dry. I just hang mine up with a couple paper clips and let it drip dry, and it will kind of curl up, but it'll reactivate and lay right back down. And I just don't seem to have that issue with smell anymore. Another thing is your palette and the lid will get really dirty, right? Just the paint kind of gets on there. So I kind of clean that. But what I found is using acetone, which is just fingernail polish remover. And you can buy this really inexpensive online. And that just cleans up acrylics like nobody's business. It's pretty amazing. All right, any questions about kind of my setup here? Nope. All right. You guys are easy.
What
And
is,
yeah,
what is the
I will
white
use,
fluid in
I'm
the
sorry,
small-
what was that?
What's the white fluid in the small container?
Oh, okay. So this is my medium and this is my water. So my medium today is just an airbrush medium, but I'm going to also be using a two other mediums. This is impasto paste to make texture. And then I've also got a retarder here, which will slow down the drying time. So I will be putting those kind of in the corner over here. I put them on the paper so they stay wet, and not the tubes, but when I put a little pile out. My other big hint, and what really made a big difference for me with blending, is a mister bottle, which, you know, I used to use a spray bottle, but I found that the spray bottle puts out these big droplets, and all of a sudden you get these runs in the water and dripping and things that I'm not wanting. So just a quick mist will just keep the paint going, and so I can do glazing, but I can also do smoothing out of edges really easily. As far as the medium is concerned, like an airbrush medium, I just very early on in my learning about acrylics, I just happened to hear one person say that they liked airbrush medium because it's basically the same consistency as water. But I don't think it's really necessary. You could use, I mean, acrylics have so many mediums with glazing mediums and all the different things. So experiment, play with those. That just happens to be the one I'm using now until I run out, and then I'll probably try something else. The good thing about the airbrush medium is, even though it looks like milk, once it dries, and this is the same with almost all acrylic mediums, is they go on kind of milky looking, but once you let them dry, they dry crystal clear. So today I'm going to be doing white and black to start the painting, just to kind of get my design. And I, at this point in my acrylic experimentation, I'm really not too picky. This is just a big tub of probably student grade, it says basic acrylic. For my gray, I'm using the same gray that I put on my paintings to use as the primer or the gesso, and that is a non-absorbent neutral gray primer. So I'll just go ahead and put some of that on my palette. Mix it up. It starts off a little odd, so just mix that up and put a pile on there. So now I've got a white and a gray. I also want to have a dark, of course. So I'm just going to use Payne's gray today. I oftentimes use black, whatever black I have. Again, I'm just playing, I'm just experimenting. I like the Payne's gray because it's not quite as dark as the black, because I have the full knowledge that going forward that I'm going to be glazing in or adding other colors. But also acrylics do dry a little bit darker than when you first put them on. So you also notice that I just wiped the part where the lid will go on there. And that's just so it doesn't, sometimes with acrylics, they'll kind of dry on like glue almost. Another trick that I'll often do is take a little bit of Vaseline. And I do that with all of these lids for like the gesso and everything else, is I actually rub Vaseline along the threads. And all of a sudden the lids are just so much easier to get on and off forever. So I'll also do that with my acrylic paint. You just want to make sure you don't accidentally get any of that Vaseline into your painting, because it will never dry. All right, anything to add, my acrylic painting friends, about your guys' setup or how you play with this? I'm gonna shut the lid on my paint thinner so I don't accidentally use any oil stuff. I have a bunch of oil painting brushes over here. I've set them aside. These are all my acrylic brushes. For anybody that's curious, this is one of my very favorite acrylic brushes that I found, and my daughter's been painting with acrylics her whole life, and she really likes these brushes. This is called the Catalyst by Princeton.
I love those, yes.
Yeah, I don't know what about it, but it just takes a beating and just really keeps its edge. I don't know what they did with these. The bristles seem a little thicker, but the great thing about acrylics is I can use really inexpensive brushes. And oftentimes with acrylics, I'll be using synthetics, which are a little softer. And I have all just different shapes here. I've got a couple Japanese or Chinese brushes here with long bristles, which are great for like trunks and things like that. They're kind of a liner brush or a Japanese calligraphy brush. And then just like with my oils, one of my favorite brushes is just these cheap chip brushes, which you can see here. I've just kind of terrorized and beat up. I do have a blending brush here. This is actually, this might be even a makeup brush. I don't know. These are tougher for me to use in acrylics versus oils, just because they get gummed up, and when I go to clean it and add water, it really makes blending, unless I'm blending really strongly, it makes it really difficult.
I was actually just going to mention this that I use to get really fluffy clouds and good blending. I'll use a synthetic brush to put the paint on, and I'm always holding a second brush of, I think it's hog hair. And it's just a really, really small filbert brush, because I find you can go in with a natural hair brush, the bristles are not going to bend so much, so you're not accidentally going to spread the paint. And when you do that at a certain stage of the drying, it kind of gets streaks in it and it can turn kind of inky. And another little tip, I really recommend having brushes that can cover a lot of space very quickly, so that once you get the consistency right with the paint, you don't have to mess around with it so much. So I've got 5 of these. I'm not sure what they are exactly. It's a Montmartre 75 mm. So it's just from work, but I've got 5 of these. I've always got some that are kind of wet, one that's like full of water, and some that are dry. And a big part of getting really good at acrylics is knowing what your brushes can do. You're only really as good as the tools that you have. So back to you, Cohen.
No, perfect. Thank you. Yeah. So you'll see, I mean, I've got, I can use a brush this big and a brush, this big on the same painting for sure. And a lot of times I'll start the painting with my big brushes, and I was excited to find these because they're very similar to the chip brush, but now I've got a painting handle that I can, really use at a distance, which I like. These little short handles sometimes are a little rougher on me.
Are those from a hardware store or are they from an art supply?
No, these were from an art store that was going out of business.
They're nice.
I
Never
don't
seen
know.
them
I can't
before.
remember. Maybe it was a craft warehouse or something. I don't know.
Good job.
Yeah, but they're fairly inexpensive and having fun. So I'm going to change the camera back up to our.
Michael, what was it looked like a paste that you were taking out of a jar?
Oh, okay. So yeah, good question. Thank you. I meant to mention that. So I put out 2 different piles of paint here. This is the retarder, which is going to slow the drying time slightly. I'm having some issues figuring out how to work with it because sometimes it reactivates when I don't want it to, but it does make glazing a little easier. The big pile underneath it is a impasto paste, which just makes the paint thicker and I can do texture. So like in the foreground areas, I can use that to, build up a little texture, because otherwise acrylics often are just so smooth unless you're using a heavy body paint, which I don't have any. I don't have any heavy body paint, and I don't have any of the acrylic opens yet. Again, when I do experimenting, I try not to introduce too many elements at one time. I try to kind of figure out, one additional thing at a time. So again, even just keeping my values limited here, just kind of going to be doing almost like a black and white underpainting. So that I can begin to experiment with colors and glazing and everything else. So I'm kind of keeping them separate. I'm going to be doing value focus and design today. And then, depending on how much time or how quickly this goes, maybe I'll get to keep painting on it and get into color, because the acrylics I can start layering in within about 15 minutes. All right, so I have designed this kind of simplistic image on Photoshop. And I like the design, I like the simplicity, and I think it could be sunrise, it could be sunset. And then I'm going to do that same image, but I'm going to change the design to something like this. So it's more, this one is much more about the ground, right? It's basically almost a third sky in this one. And then when I fold it, all of a sudden it becomes 1/3 ground. Does that make sense? So using kind of a similar design, I might flip it for one of them so they don't just look like I sat out and painted the same scene twice. So what I'm going to do is, you saw that I have a gray and a little bit of Payne's gray and a little bit of white, and I'm just going to use those to kind of lay in the painting. So I want this one, the horizontal, I want my land much lower, right? This one's much more about the sky. Got my little creek, because, you know, wouldn't be a Michael Orwick painting without one. Pretty basic. All right, so my other one is kind of the inverse. I'm going to take that horizon line and I'm going to raise it quite a ways up. So this is like 1/3 from the bottom, and this one's like 1/3 from the top. All right, so I've got a skyscape and a landscape. And that's what I really enjoy in the editing process and trying to design my paintings is, you know, what is this painting about? What's the main focus in it? Is it about the sky? Is it about the land? Is it about the water? Is it about the trees? And then once you kind of decide that, then you begin to kind of adjust your painting accordingly. I'm just kind of blocking in my big shapes, kind of going to be able to step back, and you can see it's just a slightly darker gray. The palette was already covered with that gray gesso, so that's already a mid gray. Now I'm just going a little bit darker, kind of sketching in with oils. I might go to some of my darker darks and then build them up. But with acrylics, sometimes starting in the mid areas, the mid values, actually seems to work pretty well. It's kind of interesting always mentally going back and forth from between two different designs and trying to figure that out. How's the camera angle working for you guys? Is that quite a bit better than?
Perfect. It looks good.
I'm almost a professional. You guys know better than to believe that. So yeah, I'm just getting in my big shapes. I'm again kind of thinking of that gesture, that movement. I'm thinking about my value, my structure. Again, I'm, you know, with the realization that my darks often give me my form and structure, and my lights give me my light and color. And I can just build up. I can just kind of start sneaking in there, figuring out what's my darks. Kind of, I like my darks to come forward, my darker darks.
Michael, if you weren't doing this for us on camera, would you be standing as far away from your canvas as you are now?
I mean, I have to, because I have that huge palette in the way, which I did purposely.
Okay.
You know, when I designed, a lot of my painting friends have their palette to the side of them, but I actually like being able to see my colors that I'm mixing at the same time. And yeah, I hate when I'm like, you know, really getting in there. I like to see the whole thing all at one time. And by standing back, you know, having my arm is pretty much fully extended, maybe a half bend in my arm, I just feel a lot more free. And
I was
also,
going to say your movements seem very free, and the angle the camera is at, it's easy to see that.
Yeah, it's really
good.
good
Yes.
setup, Michael.
Yeah, it's
Yay,
easier to
finally.
see. It's easier to see how your you know, your arm and your brush are working together with this in this particular angle. That's why I asked the question.
Do you ever?
Yeah, no, I do. I stand back. You know, I talk to you guys a lot about when I'm holding my brushes that I you know, if I find myself choking up on it, I try to get back here and change my grip.
Good point.
Because you just get so much more motion, and
It's far more organic.
it's more organic, it's more dancey, it's more fun. I remember back to one of the very first plein air convention, maybe it was the first plein air convention that, you know, Eric Rhodes put on from Plein Air magazine. And I was watching one of my very favorite painters back then. What was his name? John Burton. And I took all these photos of him, and I actually made a little video for him, and we ended up becoming, quick friends. And he was standing like a fencer, and he was painting and attacking and, using the very ends of his brushes, holding them very lightly. And I just found that so invigorating and so fun. I think a lot of times when we're watching people paint, we neglect to see how they're holding their brush.
Mhm.
And I always say, don't hold it like a pencil, but I still do. Of course I do. And there's reasons, and, I can still do a lot, especially if I'm using it like a pencil and very on the tips of my fingers.
Michael, do you ever sit or does anybody ever sit when they paint, or is it always standing?
Always sitting.
I sit and paint.
I try and stand.
I have to stand to do my best work. I can't sit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
good.
can't sit and paint.
Tend to-
I mean, I'm sure I can, but I never, ever, ever do. There's times where I will take the painting and put it on a desktop, but I still generally stand, like when I'm doing like detailed little branches and things like that. But yeah, I mean, again, there's no right or wrong. I have friends who are just amazing painters that sit when they paint. So whatever's comfortable, whatever allows you to paint for long periods of time, don't.
Yeah, thank you.
But if you do sit to paint and you have forever, maybe try standing. Because
Well,
what I like is
I
I'm
like to stand,
constantly
but
going back and forth.
getting older, it's harder to stand for too long. So
Yeah, and I do have like a mat, like cashiers use, a foam.
oh, you do like a foam mat?
A memory foam mat, yeah. And then
memory-
also I wear my flip flops that I wear when I paint also have memory foam in them.
Oh,
Because
nice.
yeah, my feet will really start to hurt just standing on hardwoods for, hours and hours.
Thank you.
No,
Van.
thank you. Good question. But there's no right or wrong. I mean, whatever works for you. And again, even all these things I just talked about with acrylics, that's me experimenting. That's me playing. I don't know it the best way, and I'm still learning because I'm still trying to figure out what I want acrylics to do. And even with my oils, I went out and got some new mediums, and I'm always experimenting, always playing. I'm always kind of like, I wish this could do that. Is there something out there that can do that better? All right, let's bring in some gesture of some sky here, some clouds. Let's lighten it up a little.
Can we also look at your palette at some point again? It looks like
Sure.
you've been mixing some Payne's gray with the.
Let's see if I can move this. Unfortunately, I have to undo a screw to lower it, but yeah, it's not much. I'm just kind of adding. So if I want a darker side, I just take over here,
Right.
my gray, and I haven't even used white yet, but there would be my white. So it'll often end up just kind of a value thing going across it.
Yeah, I see that.
So then I can just, because it'll stay wet, and if I need it to be even wetter, I just take my mister.
The mister, okay. And you haven't added any of the impasto paste yet, right?
No, because I'm still figuring out the design. Because if I add the impasto at this layer, I mean, it could work where you want a real textured background, but I like my texture to do work for me, not just kind of randomly.
Right.
Like I'm taking a workshop with David Sharp right now, who's one of my favorite abstract painters, and he just adds his impasto paint to his gesso.
Huh,
And
interesting.
yeah, and he likes this kind of random texture underneath. But I actually like having a little, like, again, like I like the idea of using that texture in a slightly thoughtful way. And I'm also not watering these paints down, so there is some texture that's kind of being put. So I'm a little bit conscious as I put that paint down to kind of think about the directionality of the brush stroke. And And now I'm just thinking of the gesture of some clouds that might be kind of interesting in here. And what I really like about using my gesso as my mid-gray is I can just come back in and edit out these shapes over and over and over. And you don't have to use the gesso. That's not a secret or anything. It's just gesso is generally a little bit cheaper. It's also got a little bit coverage, better coverage than some acrylics.
So you would do that in lieu of a wipe away sort of thing if you were painting?
Yeah, exactly. So this would be my version of kind of a wipe away with acrylics, is that because they dry so quickly, I don't need to do a wipe away. I can just come in here and just cover things so quickly. And I mean, I can go back and forth. I can just cover right over these silly hills that I put in there, or trees or whatever those were going to be. I don't even know.
Can you get the softness doing that you would with a wipe away?
It's not as easy, but yeah, because I've mixed all these variations of this gray. Oops, see how runny it is if I put it up there. I can just use that mid value and put it in, you know, in between. Does that make sense, Gail?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I've tried acrylics once and they dried too fast and I hated them because I couldn't manipulate them. I couldn't get the softness.
Well, I was
That's why I'm
talking to
asking
the
the question.
acrylics, Gail, and they hated you too.
Yeah, I know.
That's mean. No, I don't believe that. I think you
No,
used the
I don't know.
mister.
It wasn't me. It was the acrylics that said that.
The acrylics
Yeah.
were talking
The acrylics have spoken.
to
Away.
you.
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm surprised because usually I would think you would go with a darker, dark for your darkest areas, but it seems as though maybe it's because the values of the
Sneaking up on them.
piece you're working from don't have, there's not a lot of contrast.
No, super good observation. Absolutely. So let's, like Gail said, I'm sneaking up on it. It's weird because yeah, with oils I go from dark to light so much more strong, but with acrylics I seem to kind of go from the middle out in both directions.
Yeah.
You know, towards my darks and towards my lights.
And
so
towards
I'm
light.
bringing in some of those lights. And yeah, I don't know if that's right or if it's wrong, or if that was just Cheryl, who's, where is she, in Norway or wherever, you know, giving me bad advice. But
Well, it sort of makes sense if you can't manipulate it as much as oil, that and your darks are so impactful, you kind of want to sneak up on them.
yeah, and it's so easy to do. I bet you I could do from darks to lights because but what I'm kind of looking for is preserving glowing areas. That's where I'm putting in these lights. Now when I glaze back into those areas, but let's go ahead and get to the darks. I should probably clean this brush or pick up another brush. So oftentimes what I will do is just put my brush on the edge of my palette like that. And then I will just take my mister and spray the brush bristles. And now it's going to stay wet for a long time on that palette. So I don't have to, if I dip it into my water cup, then the paint becomes real runny, you know, if I don't clean it out properly. So now I'm just grabbed another brush, kind of similar, a little bigger, and I'm going to use some darks. And I'm going to go ahead and I wish I could just flip this a little easier. I'm going to add in some of that texture medium to my blacks. It's going to make my blacks look a little milkier, a little bit lighter. I'm holding the camera, so sorry if it's a little shaky. It's going to make it a little milkier looking, but I do know from using it that it will dry not milky. It'll dry dark.
And that's the impasto paste?
Yeah, that's my impasto. I'm not using any of the retarder yet.
And you're mixing it in with a brush, not a palette knife?
Yeah, I could do it either way.
It doesn't matter. Okay.
Now, yeah. So you can see how milky it looks. So that part's a little bit tougher to read for me because and it'll dry in about 15 minutes. It'll start to darken up. Does that make you feel a little better seeing those darks in there?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I did it for you.
Well, it wasn't your use, you know.
That's just Payne's
Usually you
gray.
start with the dark, so thank you.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're fine. So I'm just kind of wondering how far back on this one do I want my darks to go? Because I know I want it to get kind of hazy. So let's just go a little further back with some of it. The thicker I put on the acrylics, of course, the longer they'll stay wet. So there's some piles of kind of thick paint where I just kind of crushed it down on there a little bit. Let's take a little bit of our dark. I'm going to mix it with some of the gray. So it's not as dark as on the ground, but let's bring in some darks into these clouds. I know that my sun is going to be kind of here on the horizon. So it's going to be, my darks are going to be more on top of some of those clouds. But yeah, I just love this going back and forth with acrylics, how quickly I can just keep modulating and modifying my values.
It's great. It's very impressive.
Kind of funny how quickly something begins to appear, right? And that's just really roughed in. I mean, I don't know how long I've been painting, but I'm working on 2 paintings at the same time, just thinking about the lights, the darks, some of the angles, some of the composition, some of the design. Got this brush so loaded up. If I want these paints to dry faster, saying I wanted to glaze in or whatever else, I could be just putting the paint on a little bit thinner.
At this point, Michael, are you concerned with hard edges in the clouds or?
I'm sure really not. Yeah, great question. No, not too much. I mean, it's kind of ideal if some of these kind of loose, fun, free brush strokes work out. But if they don't, I'm not too worried about it.
Okay.
Good question. Good question. Yeah, and sometimes these messy brush strokes actually really work because they're just so organic and free, but it doesn't matter if they're not right. You know, my ideal is that I just accidentally almost slap them in right, but if not, they're easy for me to modify with the acrylic paints. Now I can just come back over. You saw how, I mean, I just put those darks in and already I can start bringing some of these lighter colors across the top. So I can get my texture from the darks. I can get my texture from the lights. Just kind of delightful in a way, just this back and forth. Like sometimes I'm a little bit nervous that I might be becoming a bit of more of an acrylic painter. Don't tell my galleries, but I'm sure having fun playing with
It's
it.
okay, Michael.
Going to the dark side.
Painters accept you. That's good. So good for you.
Go to the medium side.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but they both work so well together, and, you know, learning one helps you learn the other, you know, maybe not all at the same time, maybe, you know, kind of work, if you want to be more of an oil painter, work on that for a little more, then work with acrylics. I think maybe if I had done both at the beginning, it would have been a little bit confusing to kind of jump around back and forth.
This may be a silly question, but why do you like the black and white underpainting?
Oh, yeah.
Versus,
That's a good question.
Yeah, versus, you know, the traditional, well, I'll say traditional, but the transparent red or burnt sienna and burnt umber.
Yeah, the truth is, Gail, that I go back and forth. I've been doing black and white recently with it,
Mhm.
but what I was doing was these same colors, but I was mixing burnt umber or reds into the paint, which worked great.
You mix
But
the
what I
grays?
found is what I can do is once I get this locked in, because it's so easy to modify the values versus trying to figure out the colors, is I can actually glaze this with that transparent earth red. And all of a sudden I get that effect.
Okay.
But yeah, no, there's no reason. Like you can definitely. That's funny. I just thought I was going to put on dark paint and I put on light paint and grabbed the wrong brush.
Michael,
But
I have
again,
a question.
please.
When you do oil painting on the acrylic, does that mean only glazing or it is the whole painting with oil?
You can do the whole painting. I've generally been trying to take my acrylic paintings to a point where I can do mostly glazing, but you can do a whole painting on top.
Okay.
So if I wanted to stop here and just go, okay, I've got my design locked in, then I could literally come back in. It'd be like doing my pencil sketch before I do a painting, right? But if I wanted to focus more on glazing, then maybe I'll take it a little further, kind of refine things and yeah, get a little more detail on there.
I end up doing a little bit of both.
Oh,
Yeah, I generally do a little bit of both.
oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of the nice thing too, is then I get a chance to kind of let it sit for a little bit. Ideally I want my acrylic painting to sit for about 2 to 3 days to really cure, at least 24 hours before I touch it with oil paints. Just because the paints will be dry to the touch, but they're not cured yet. And so that little bit of moisture that's still in the acrylic paints for the first couple of days can really mess with your the longevity of your oil painting. So in an ideal world, and that's why I like to do a number of them at a time, is I'll do like 3, 4, 5 acrylic paintings and then move to something else. And in those 3 days, I'll let those dry and then I can come back in with my oils. So here I just put in a whole light area, just put a little mister on there. Let's grab a brush that I can control a little better. Cleaning off a brush here with my paper towel, dip it in a little bit of water, maybe give this a little bit more mist because again, it dries so fast. And let's start kind of figuring out some gradation. So you see how I can soften these edges with that mister bottle really nicely?
Are you using just standard acrylics right now, not open acrylics or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't own any acrylics yet. Figured I'd kind of learn these and then start experimenting with those.
With the open, okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of my idea of a mist or a fog. Let's go ahead and grab a soft brush here and so you see, I just kind of keep going back and forth. I guess that's one reason I like working on two, is because I'm not impatient. I can kind of let those set up a little bit. And then what I'm going to come back doing is start refining some of those value shifts. Because again, I feel like this is just very messy, very quick. And I'm just testing to see, does that design work? Is it doing what I want? And then before I start bringing in detail and different little focus elements and things like that. Like these hills that I kind of put in the background, are very messy. Like I should probably kind of figure out, are those trees or are those hills or are those trees and hills? What's going on back here? So let's make this side trees.
You have the same issues with white in acrylics as you would in oil. In other words, if you start adding white to something, it's really, really hard to go back and put in darks. With oil.
No, not the same. I think that's one of the things I like. So here I've got the light in, and I'm just going to bring some trees kind of over the top of it. And yeah, no problem. So let's go ahead and do what you just said, and I'll bring some lights across this whole thing. And I'm going to change this to be kind of a hill back here versus trees on this side, kind of a distant hill back there. So I'm going to lighten that value, and I'm going to bring it across the top. So need darker than that. Darker than that. There we go. So yeah, no problem going right up, even with the white wet, I can just bump up right against it. Let's come back to the trees because they're in the same line on my horizon. So I want to lower these trees to bring them closer to us. Hopefully those trees feel like they're coming closer than this hill. But what else do I have is I've still got the bottom of that where the fog is kind of getting in there. So let's bring in a little more fog. Let's bring that fog up a little higher here and a little lower over here. Let's lighten that fog. The brushes are in effect right now, so.
So you continue to just put your brush down on the palette and not stick it in your jar of water.
Yeah, because once I stick it in that jar of water, it soaks up so much water.
Too runny, yeah.
Yes, but I do spray it with the mister bottle.
Okay, the mister's really key here, I think.
For me, it is, yeah.
Because yesterday,
when the stay wet palette and the mister bottle, that is definitely the things that have allowed me to not hate oil or acrylics.
When I was working on this landscape yesterday, I had too much water at one point, and I tried to blot it with a paper towel, and then I really screwed it up. It's like,
yeah, it's really annoying, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
right.
All of a sudden, it just starts running and
well,
making drips, and if you get a drip down, it can pick up or reactivate a whole area.
It's a real pain. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, I've definitely dealt with that. I have a acrylic painting now that I really like. Besides that happened, and you know, it went through a whole bunch of different colors and went through a whole bunch of different values, and there's this line kind of going down. I'm like, do I have to go back in and remix all those colors and figure out all those values? The answer is no. I can just learn my lesson and keep moving on until the next time I have to relearn that same lesson. All right, so I'm going to put these dirty, crazy. So far, I've basically used all shop brushes, right? Those cheap 35-cent brushes. And that's kind of fun, right? There's the beginning of a something, right? So now I can pick up some of these nicer brushes, and I'm going to come back in and I can start to actually really start to carve in and refine some areas. Like, let's figure out this creek. So I'm going to have my sun here, right? Where's my light source? That's always important. putting it there. Maybe, yeah, that's a nice spot. It's almost in the middle though. It's kind of uncomfortable. So maybe I'll move it over to here. Just slightly off center. So you can see how I'm able to go back in and start carving away. Let's figure out, where does my water start to pick up that light? Probably about here. It's going to be strongest and brightest here. But it can still be quite light. Just grabbing one of those messy shop brushes just so I don't have such clean brush marks here. Maybe these grasses need to be a little taller here, cutting in front of that. Maybe the bank back here needs to be actually a little lower. I'm just kind of wondering, like, does the water look like it's going uphill? Does it look like it's flat and flowy? And I'm just thinking the negative shapes, right? What are the shapes around these clouds? Using a nice, clean brush that I can get good edges. All right, I don't probably want all hard edges, but I'll come back in and modify those. But right now, as I'm figuring out what this cloud bank is doing, so what do you think watching somebody paint in black and white versus in color? Is it still interesting, or does color really help and make it that much more interesting?
I think.
I like the black and white. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I like the value studies. And I also like watching the brush strokes.
I agree. Looks very much like you're carving it.
Right, yeah, and that's kind of what I'm doing is, yeah, you saw it was just a big soft edged mess. Again, it's like having just lumps of clay, and now I'm coming back in with, tools and carving that clay a little bit. And I do the same thing with my oils, just the process is a little different, right? But there's different stages in painting. It's, where you're kind of loading up the paints, if, depending on how you want to apply the paint, but where you're loading it up and then you can sculpt it, move it around or modify. And the good thing with acrylics is when you load up paints is you get these fun little textures, especially if, I'm not like, if I put a tree branch or a tree here really thick with thick black paint and then decided I don't want it there, that's the bummer, is I'll have this ghost of a tree underneath my paint. So that's why I kind of start with the paint, the acrylics, a little thinner until I really start to get at least the idea of a plan. With my skies, when I know I'm going to come back in and glaze, I will often go really quite light with it, meaning a lot of white, because the glazes, when I put them on top, especially if I want them to have a luminescence where they appear to be glowing from behind, then I really need a light value or almost a white surface. So, and I know that anytime I glaze, those colors are going to get a little bit darker.
Oh, coast is clear. Huh? Just letting you know the coast is clear. Oh, that's got my class. Is this yours?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I was rearranging these.
Oh, I didn't even notice. I've been.
Yeah, those are the ones that left behind.
All right. Listening in on somebody's conversation there.
I just threw those down since they were.
Yeah. So any questions about kind of what's going on here as I kind of try to figure out some cloud shapes? But the great thing is, even if I go, oh man, what did I do? I just created this very weird V shape. You know, I don't love it. What can I do? I could literally come back in with my dark paint and restructure that very quickly, right? That's what I think people don't get with acrylics is they're so forgiving because you can just keep going back and forth.
Will you soften those last white marks that you put on?
Yeah.
Yeah, those.
I'm sorry, was it a question or I didn't?
Yes, yes. Will you soften the bold white strokes you're putting on now?
Yeah. So I can do it when they're wet, like this, you know, because this area is darker, my light's over here. So, you know, and then I can kind of come back in and lighten those back up a little. Or what I can do, Linda, is in these areas where it's probably pretty dry already, because it's been a minute, the acrylics dry so dang fast, is I can just mix up an in-between value.
Okay.
In between these darks and these lights, I can just kind of mix in between and I can soften them up really nice and easy that way.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's, again, part of the reason I like using a very simplistic value pattern. I'm not saying this is the way I'm always going to work, but as I'm learning the acrylics, literally learning their working properties, figuring things out, I may as well take out some of the frustration. Plus, I love glazing. That's one of my favorite things about oils. And it's something that I think is underutilized in acrylics to a degree. And but acrylics allow me to do it so quickly. Like I'll probably be able to come in and glaze this whole painting in just a little bit. So already I'm starting to think about the undersides of these clouds. So they're lit from underneath here. So I want to kind of be able to imagine, you know, what's going to happen, especially because I know I'm planning to glaze back in. So let's think a little bit about, okay, if my light's here, then the underbelly or the backside of a lot of these clouds is a little lighter, right? With kind of darker tops, maybe a bit of rim light on the tops of the light of the clouds. But do you see all of a sudden these clouds went from just these bold shapes to all of a sudden they're starting to hopefully turn and have a little bit of form and structure to them?
Yeah.
At least I hope so.
They are. The sky this morning was sort of kind of like what you're painting now. And it was so full of color. I mean, like paintbrushes of color. God was playing with my mind this morning for because it was like orange and golden and pink and yellow, and then it was like cerulean blue or manganese blue and then ultramarine blue, and oh my God, I was just having fits.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you get any good photos?
I did. I posted some of them.
Might be perfect for your final assignment, or if you're willing to share with the
yeah, I will.
See that? I just, my brush, I was holding it like this and just, so I'm gonna get there, put a little bit of, gonna mist it so it doesn't dry. And I'm just gonna take a clean dry paper towel. Ta-da, pretty easy. Those paints underneath were still a little wet, so it wiped back up, but because that area is just chaos, grasses, not an issue. All right, I'm gonna let this set and then I'm gonna come back in and hit it with white one more time. So let's go over here and soften these. So I've got my sun. So a lot of times, especially with this cheap white that I'm using here, I have to hit it a couple times, like literally layer it up to get it to be opaque. So I'm just aware with that with acrylics, that acrylics are a little more transparent oftentimes. And so sometimes it takes building up, which I think if you were trying to make real hard edges would be annoying, but I do love my soft edges and my dissipated brush strokes. So kind of works for me. All right, let's do the same thing. Let's create transitions in these clouds. So a little bit darker. Can always tell when I'm a little bit nervous when I'm painting, whether it's a difficult thing or I'm not positive of what I'm doing because I hold my breath. All of a sudden, when I get done with a brush stroke or an area, all of a sudden go, ah.
I think we all do that.
Probably. But yeah, the physiology of painting is such an interesting thing, and the physiology of bravery and insecurity and okay, so what do you think of these two different designs? One horizontal, one vertical.
Beautiful.
I love them.
Isn't that fun that I can just revisit, you know, like, oh, I don't know which one to paint. I don't know which one to paint. So then I just don't paint. Or instead, no, I'll just do both.
Yeah.
Right?
Do both and do a third.
They
Yeah.
look great, very successful.
Beautiful, Michael. And I love the way you showed us how to soften. I wish Cheryl had seen you do this. She'll see this demonstration on the.
I'm not going to show it to her.
Oh, yes, she will. She'll love it.
All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-mist. Just kind of like Eloise said about pre-dipping her brush in water. I can pre-mist an area like you would do with watercolor, right? And I don't want to add a lot. I definitely don't want it dripping. So now I just took a little bit of white paint because it's wet. This will slow down this drying time of this white, I hope. He says everything so confidently, even though he's probably only done it once before.
Okay. But look at that. Wow.
Oh,
Fog.
That's,
As my daughter used to call it, it's froggy out here.
oh.
Is that kind of frog typical in your neck of the woods?
Oh my gosh, yeah, almost every morning we get nice froggy days.
It was very foggy here today.
We don't get that.
Down.
So I kind of wondered about your fascination with fog.
Yeah, I just find it so magical. Yeah, it used to frustrate me. I think I've told that story before in class, but I used to be like, oh man, I wish I lived somewhere like California where it was clear and beautiful all the time. But now I go to California, I'm like, how do people paint this? Like, where's your atmosphere? Where's your haze? Where's your fog? And I just love it but I also love the mystery and the almost magical, mythical, whatever terminology you want to use. But it's not for everybody. I've got friends that do come from California and just like, what do I do? Like when I go to Arizona and you can just see forever.
Yes.
It's difficult for me. Everything seems to have a crisp edge to it, and I just don't know what to do.
That's why I paint that way, Michael.
Yep, there you go. Exactly. And yeah, there's painters that do it, but I think the main thing is just to start to observe, right? and just go, okay, what is happening? What's happening with the colors? What's happening with the values? What's happening with the edges? And that's how you paint a place, you know, versus me, like the first couple of times I went to Arizona for different events and things, I just would try to turn Arizona into Oregon atmosphere, right? I'm just like, I'm just going to pretend it's foggy here. Or I'm going to add, you know, blue and gray down the backgrounds a lot more than they would actually appear. And it just looked silly. Didn't look real. Didn't look like I was actually observing what I was seeing. I was painting what I knew to be true in a different place.
Well, here we have dust on the horizon in the distance.
Which will give you beautiful sunsets.
It does. We have lots of dust.
So I kind of, maybe what I'll do is just kind of bring in a little more light so that this, in the sun area here. And this is a brush I've never used, which is kind of a chaos brush, just a big round of some sort. When my daughter comes home for the summer, she's going to be like, what did you do to all my brushes? You left them.
You needed to use them for frog.
What's that?
Said you needed to use them for frog.
Yeah, exactly. They got froggy. Making some nice weird brush marks. It's kind of fun up there.
That's really beautiful.
Too bright. Let's darken that up. Give us our clouds some motion and movement. And anybody seeing anything that I'm not seeing? Maybe these could be a little darker. Trees. Being lazy, I picked up this weird brush and I'm just not putting it down, but I'm also kind of just seeing what Marks doesn't want to make. I'm going to squeeze out just a touch more Payne's Gray because I'm out of it on my palette. And what I'm going to do is just kind of come back and throw in some grasses, and then we're going to take a break. And what I'll do during break is go ahead and hit these with a hairdryer. And then I will actually be able to glaze. Glaze right into them. If that's what you guys would rather see, or would you rather this be your lesson and then we look at your guys' work and then I'll come back to these next week? Please be honest, because yeah, I want to see your guys' work as well. Would you rather I keep painting, or do you guys want to start looking at your paintings on our group?
I feel like
Keep painting. Painting.
feedback.
Gonna run an errand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hope you're not going that way.
I'm not sure I.
I'll go around the
There's some
freeway. Yeah, it's
Keep
12.
painting.
Here, take that easel back that I borrowed.
Oh,
Keep painting.
Keep painting.
I'd like to.
Is
Yes.
that what all that?
No.
I sounded like garbled. So the consensus was keep painting.
Yeah.
I'd like,
so.
I'd like
And
to do some critiquing this week.
yeah, I feel like it would be really valuable for us to start getting some feedback where we can like actually kind of talk about it emotively, especially because yeah, we don't have too many more hours together. It might be kind of nice, you know, to see how far we've all come.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. The problem is once I start critiquing, we'll be into it for a long time. So yeah, why don't we, I mean, I literally woke up this morning going, holy cow, I haven't talked to them about their beautiful work in 2 weeks. So maybe what we'll do is, and it'll probably be better for these paintings, is I will be able to let them sit. And so maybe these will be about done for today. But I do want to show you something really quickly. I don't know if it's dry enough, but I want to lighten up the underbellies of these clouds. So what I can do is actually take a little bit of my medium, and just like Eloise said, I'm just using a medium as opposed to water, but it would work with water just fine. And I'm just barely dipping in this soft brush, and I might even dab off a little bit on a paper towel and watch the undersides of both these clouds. I hope they're not too wet. Oh, they're dang wet. Let's see. Always be willing to sacrifice your paintings. And I'm just gonna, there we go. That's working. You see how I'm just kind of softening that edges and creating a little bit so it looks like the light is coming underneath?
Yeah.
Let's do it again.
That's great. That looks good. Is that a makeup brush?
What's that?
Is that a makeup brush?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
That's
you
great.
can get, they're called mop brushes.
Oh,
Yeah.
And I've got a ton I love them.
yeah, I do too. I have one. I think it's great.
Yeah, I've got different sizes and I absolutely love them.
Yeah, the only thing is once I stop using it and put it into the water, it's almost unusable because it's a mop. It literally
Yeah,
soaks up.
you can't get it wet in anything, regardless
Right.
of using oil or
Well,
otherwise.
when-
it's
So
very
if
effective.
you go on Amazon and buy makeup brushes or whatever, you can
Yeah.
buy a whole pack with all the different sizes and they're really inexpensive. But they do throw hairs. So that's the good part is I can just, paint with one. I don't know how many I have here. Looks like 7 or 8 of them. And so I can continue to modify.
So
then
do you wash them out when you're finished with the painting and then let them dry and they're okay? Or you
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. Once they dry, they're great. But if I dip it in water now, it literally is a mop. It will just have so much water. Unless this was really dry, I wouldn't want to touch it with a big wet mop brush. So are you seeing how lightening these clouds is pushing them back a little bit versus the ground? And I can still leave them darker at the top. So now all of a sudden I've got this perspective going back like this in the sky, right? And I also have this perspective going up to here, right? It only works if you do the sound effects. Right? Does that kind of
I
read
think
like
that's
that?
a boy thing, Michael. I think boys have to do the sound effect.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
My
you should have seen it
grandson.
when I was painting all my little army scenes and
Oh, yeah.
action figures. Yeah, it was all gun blasts and explosions.
And
My mom
boys
would have
make
to
much better gun blasts than girls.
when I was painting or drawing in church, my mom would be like, quiet, stop making tank sounds in church. Oh, well, you can see how cheap these brushes are.
Yeah.
Just
So do you only use them once then? If you
no,
can't
no.
clean them?
I'll put some glue back on there and put that back in after class.
No, I mean that you don't clean the brush then. You just let it dry.
Oh no, I'll clean it.
How do you
But I can't use it after it's clean until I've dried it.
Oh, okay. So you
And then I can use it. It's just I'm introducing a whole new set of possible issues with having a sopping wet brush.
So you can wash it and it's just you have to dry, it has to dry before you can use it again.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, good.
The more you use them, the less hair will fall out.
That's true.
When you wet them often, like every other day or so, if you're doing acrylic underpaintings, the more you use them, the less they'll shed hair.
And the nice thing with acrylics too is I'm not scared to use my fingers. With oils, I'm always a little nervous unless I'm wearing gloves, which I need to start doing more of. All right, you guys have seen probably enough modification, but that's fun, right? I mean, something kind of turned out. They look like something, foggy creeks going back into distance towards some pine trees and a distant hill, I hope. This value's too dark. But I just love how forgiving they are. And, after class, I'll go back in and modify them a little bit more. So now what I'm going to do is now I'm going to dip them into the paint thinner. Typically, I mean, paint thinner, water.
Water.
What I would do typically, because there's no reason, is I will just take my paper towel and pull out the excess paint before I dip them in that water.
Oh,
And that just makes the cleanup so much easier. So many people just drop them in the water, but then you just get really, really messy water, and it's harder to clean the brushes later. Let me change the camera angle to show you the palette again. So it's still really quite organized, right? Except for I'm out of Payne's Gray again. The Payne's Gray seems pretty weak, so I burned through it a lot. I've got a ton of my gray still, which is great because I can just go and gesso some things if I want after. And then I've got quite a bit of my white left. Let me get a bigger palette knife. This is like my tiniest one here. So just using a big palette knife now, what I can do is just take this mess and put it all together. You guys are able to see this okay?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Put it all together, and I've just got a nice darker gray pile, whatever color that value that ends up, but it's still very usable, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of runny because these have been misted and stuff, but it'll kind of start to solidify. But it's some nice, man, that's a beautiful, just middle gray, maybe slightly darker than middle gray. Then I take my paper towel and I'm just going to wipe that area down where the paint is not. And I have, even though it looks dirty, there's almost no pigment here. And I have a whole new clean mixing area. And another thing is with these pieces of paper, you can actually wash them and reuse them. They'll look dirty, they're stained, but you can use them multiple times.
The palette paper, you mean?
Yeah, the palette paper.
Wow.
I just do the same thing. What I do is just grabbing some clips here real quick.
Are you gonna close that now and keep it for another day, or you're not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So imagine this is the paper from here. I'll just take it, put it in the sink, rub it down a little bit. And then I just take these little hooks, these little clips, put it on there.
Yeah, you could use clothespins too.
Yeah, you could use anything. And I just have some thumbtacks on the, actually from the bottom of one of my easels. And I just hang it to dry. And it gets wrinkly, but it reflattens out once it dries.
Good
So
advice.
same thing with the sponge. So yeah, let's just see. So what if I'm done painting today, or at least for this session, because we're going to take a break and then look at your work. All I'll do is I've got my texture media, my retarder here. I would normally have Payne's Gray, my gray gesso, and my white. I'm just going to take my mister bottle again. Give them a little bit of water on top, and find the lid, and I just put it on top. The main thing is to make sure the corners are closed. It's not the easiest lid to put on because it is so airtight, but what I do is just go around the edge multiple times, checking the corners. Because even just a little bit of an opening will let it dry out much, much faster. So that's it. I just kind of do that, just kind of make sure that everything's actually pushed down. I did a good job. Normally I find a couple areas that, need to reseal, but that's it. Now I just keep it flat. If let's say 2 or 3 days go by and I haven't used it, I might open it up. I might even pour a little bit more water like into a corner so that the sponge soaks it up, and maybe I'll remist it. But that's about it. And these paints, I mean, I've had them go for weeks sometimes. And again, using the hydrogen, just a tablespoon or about that poured into the water underneath the sponge. and it seems to kill the bacteria that makes your sponge stinky.
Good.
Any questions about playing with acrylic paints before we jump over to
Hey, Michael, I do have a question.
Please.
This is Graham. I had a hard time getting in this morning, so
Oh, sorry, Graham.
I missed the first half hour, but I have a question about that gray gesso. Is that something you made up, or does it come like that in some container?
This one happens to come from a container.
And it's called gray gesso?
And it's a little bit on the warm side. I see that it says neutral gray N7. And it's a tiny bit warm, which I like. But you could just mix it. I mean, if I had my black and my white, which is what I used to do, I would just mix a gray in the middle and
mix it with gesso. Yeah.
Doesn't need to be gesso, but I just found that this gesso is a little bit cheaper than, than the acrylics. I mean, truthfully, I could be using white gesso, gray gesso, and black gesso, or white gesso and gray gesso, and doing a lot of the same thing. And then, especially if you wanted to do oils over the top, you'd be in a really safe spot.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Any last questions before we take a break?
Nope.
Nope.
Thank you guys for letting me make a mess in black and white. That was fun. And I can't wait to visit it next week and do some playing with different colors and glazing.
Great.
And yeah, so let's take a break.
How long?
10 minutes.
Thanks.
Thank you.